Welcome to the podcast Listen to Unlearn, proudly sponsored by Gladwell Academy, your Agile transformation partner. Please join us in welcoming our host for today.
And that's me, Eduardo, your host for today's podcast session, also known as Uncle Eduardo. It's great to have you here with me today because I have to say I'm quite excited for this session because I have a guest that is very well known in the area of Agile, in the area of Scaled Agile as well, and I'm not sure what else should I say because everyone knows you, Andy. So Andy is an SPCT, is a SAFe fellow, is also a Chief Methodologist at Scaled Agile, and he presented a keynote session this morning during the RTE Summit 2023 here in the beautiful Haarlem in the Netherlands. And now he's here, and I have the pleasure to have him as a participant of this podcast of today. So welcome, Andy. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Eduardo. It's great to be here. It's great to be back at the RTE Summit. It's been a few years since I've been here. And as you mentioned, it was great to have the opportunity to talk this morning on the topic of flow. And also, since I did the talk, I've had so many wonderful conversations from RTEs telling me about how they're applying SAFe, some of their successes, but also some of the challenges. So I'm learning a huge amount today.
That's great to hear. Thanks for joining us. And with no further ado, I want to go deep into the subject of our talk. And also, it's a part of your presentation during this morning, the RTE as the ultimate flow coach. So Andy, I'm going to start with a question for you. Can we affirm and be 100% sure that the RTE is a flow coach?
So let me answer that in this way, Eduardo. So one of the things I started with this morning, which was another proposition or perhaps a position that we're taking in the market, is to reflect that perhaps we're moving beyond conversations about whether one team is agile or not. And I suggested to our audience that perhaps the RTEs have found themselves in situations where they were being asked, are we more agile than we were last year? Is this team more agile than this team? Is your Agile Release Train getting more agile over time? And what we've been reflecting on at Scaled Agile is actually those questions are useful, but perhaps it's not the question we should be asking ourselves. The question that we're moving now to think more deeply about is the question related to flow. Do we have the ability, and are we improving our ability to flow value to customers more quickly? And when we think about who in a SAFe enterprise is best positioned to help us do that, the RTE holds this very special position because the Agile Release Train is the way that we bring together the people, the systems, the information, everything we need to truly enable end-to-end flow. And one thing I said this morning, Eduardo, was whereas the product manager is very focused on what we're building, whereas the system architect is very focused on the technology choices, the RTE is this one person who can truly step back, look at the end-to-end workflow, and really apply flow across the entire value stream. And I think that puts them in a unique position, particularly for the art and how the art operates, to be this ultimate flow coach as I described it.
So that is an interesting thing because what I see in many different companies, for instance, is that although the RTEs, they have the knowledge, they understand a lot about their role, for instance, they still lack this decision-making, the possibility to decide, because you said yourself this morning that one of the jobs that the RTE needs to do, and something that the RTE needs to be paying a lot of attention is on the value stream, all the different steps and how the small boxes, they fit and they connect with each other, try to spot these waste, pockets of waste and so on throughout the system. But I see many RTEs that they are still not empowered enough to take decisions and say, hey, let's do something about it. And I need you, I don't know who I need, but we need to do something about it because ultimately this is going to affect the whole company. So how can we help these folks, these RTEs, for instance, on fulfilling their role and helping the company to help themselves.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And actually, the starting point for solving that challenge, I think and I hope, was some of the work we did around Safe 6.0. So in Safe 6.0, one of the things we did was went back to all of the roles in the big picture and asked ourselves, what do these roles need to be able to do to be truly effective? We worked with individuals fulfilling those roles in organizations that were effective, and we also heard from those that were finding it challenging to be effective in their roles. And the new responsibility wheels, the visualization of the responsibility areas, helped, I think, to not only highlight areas that people had been working in today, but also areas that were being neglected. So suddenly, as an example, for Scrum Masters and team coaches, you saw that we were calling out the role they played in facilitating PI planning alongside the RTE. For RTEs, we're now calling out the importance of them optimizing flow across the value stream. So step one was us at Scaled Agile helping them to recognize and then share with others that this is part of their role. I think the second part of it, though, and perhaps this came across also this morning, is I think some RTEs have ended up in a position where they're almost nervous about whether it's permissible for them to make suggestions, to change the system, to update the ARC Kanban swim lanes. And I think they've found themselves in a position where the emphasis on facilitator has almost become so great that they've forgotten themselves as system thinker. And if you think back to what we say, Eduardo, in SAFE, we talk about if a system is not managed, the components of the system are selfish, we will sub-optimize. So one thing I hope I got over today was the RTE needs to remind themselves that they're this system thinker, not just a facilitator, not just an enabler. And then the final thing, of course, is they need to demonstrate the improvements, the suggestions, the ideas that they come up with, how those lead to better outcomes. And we spoke about one thing this morning, which I hope would be helpful for them. When you find an opportunity to deliver some kind of improvement to how we work, can you describe that in a manner that the business will understand? Can you describe the potential in a way that leaders can get behind? And I think slowly over time, they will get to see and show the value they truly bring to these enterprises. If we can let RTEs work to their full potential, they can achieve anything in helping us optimize the Agile Release Trains.
So for the audience here, what we are talking about is how can these RTEs they become better and better on their roles, and also how they can help the organization to become more efficient and more effective. And having that in mind, and just linking with what you just said, Andy, and people will notice that, so this is a free conversation. We start with the topic and then we never know where it's going to end. You said one thing that is really important. So RTEs, they need to be system thinkers. They need to be system thinkers because they need to look from a helicopter view. They need to understand and spot this kind of areas, improvements, and people that they need to talk. They need to help and influencing and so on and so forth. So in that spirit, how can we help someone to become a system thinker? How can we help RTEs to take this position of system thinker and have this mindset or skill developed, if you will?
I certainly agree that part of this is the skills development that you mentioned. And of course, when we talk about flow, we talk about it across the Agile Release Train, but we also talk about it across the entire enterprise. So if we take a step back, there is a job to be done for our SBCs, our Lean Agile Center of Excellence, our transformation teams to make sure they equip the people doing this role with the skills they need. One of the things we spoke about earlier this year was around the topic of decentralizing control. And when we spoke about decentralizing control, we spoke about two critical pillars. And those critical pillars were, do we have organizational clarity? So does the RTE, if we use them as the example, understand what it is we're trying to achieve? And then do we have technical competence? Have we given that individual the skills and the tools they need to do their job effectively? So I completely agree with you. It is about training, it is about development. Do they understand, and have we supported them in understanding how to apply value stream mapping? Do they have the knowledge and tools available to understand how to measure flow? Do they understand how to accelerate flow? So we don't want to leave them to solve this on their own. The other thing, though, I think even when they come to actually help support us improve, they're not on their own either. One of the things I mentioned this morning is that the RTE and the Scrum Masters and team coaches, they work as a group. They're supporting each other some of the flow improvements are not for the RTE to deliver, they're for other individuals in teams or leaders, but the RTE is surfacing these things. They're holding up this mirror to the Agile Release Train, to the business owners, to the leaders, to the teams on that train, to help them understand what it is they must do. I think the other important thing, Eduardo, that we see a lot of organizations struggle with is really closing the loop in terms of quantifying the benefits that have been delivered. And there's nothing like building confidence in allowing your RTEs to be a little bit more autonomous in helping to improve the system by seeing things that have been delivered previously that have really helped us achieve quantifiable and improving outcomes. So the other message I made very clear this morning is start with something small. Don't go completely wide across the whole system. Find a small workflow as an RTE, something that maybe isn't working well today, maybe continuous exploration, maybe some of our customer interviews, our release process, and just focus on a small part of the workflow, think about what you can do to improve flow, build a case around that, get some support, deliver that as your first improvement, and then over time you'll start to see the support for the work you do growing.
That's great. That's really great tip, Andy. And we were just talking just before we start the recording, for instance, and you say that this year especially you would like to focus a lot on the role of the RTE and the development of the RTE because you and also Scaled Agile and also companies all around the world, they recognize the importance and the pivotal role that an RTE has in this whole system. So what is it that you have learned so far on this quest of helping, understanding, providing suggestions, tips, and tricks? What have you learned so far with this objective of yours?
So I think one important learning, and in fact this was a conversation I was having just a few minutes before we began our discussion, organizations are now maturing with SAFe. Of course, some organizations are beginning on their journey, but many have been on this journey for multiple years. They have many, many Agile Release Trains, and you've been involved in transformations for a time, Eduardo, and you've seen the same. They're now asking, what do we do in year 5, in year 6, in year 7? And I was speaking to an RTE that was naturally finding that their responsibility set was increasing. A lot of the work in terms of facilitating PI planning, running the, let's say, the coach sync, running the system demo, the scrum masters, the team coaches, the product owners, the product managers, they were almost autonomous in being able to do that. And what that was allowing was the RTE to be then released to think about some of the bigger questions. How does our Agile Release Train fit into the overall strategy of the organization? How can we better align ourselves to some of the portfolio practices? How can we really make sure that we're delivering and measuring the value that is being delivered to our customers? How can we make sure that we're better connected to the business? And how can we bring some of those business teams onto the Agile Release Train itself? And maybe very topical, how are we building a working environment that is really driving up levels of employee engagement? So I think, I won't say a lot of people, but some people I think don't have the opportunity to move beyond the more functional activities of managing and facilitating events, helping to run things like PI planning, helping to coordinate product manager and system architect activities. But actually there's a whole world beyond that. Whether it's going into the business, whether it's helping to support business owners, whether it's training the organization on flow. And that's what I'm hearing today in conversations I've had about how RTEs have this huge opportunity ahead of them to think more broadly about their role. And that's why I think it's such an exciting role.
So what do you think it will be an evolution or the next step for people that are playing this role of RTE?
I think one of the big evolutions, and I just spoke to someone who was in their 6th year as an RTE, is really thinking about how do we adapt SAFe to our specific context. SAFe is a framework, and you and I know that's how we describe it. It has a set of principles, core values, there's a lean agile mindset, and of course it has a set of core practices. But there's also a lot of adaptability in SAFe, and there's lots of areas where the RTE can really think about how do I make SAFe context specific to the organization I work in. I had one RTE sharing with me that they were running super short PIs, 6 to 7 weeks, because they found in their context that was perfect for the type of work they did. I had another RTE today telling me that they're finding that in their particular context, the amount of change they're managing means that they have to be prepared for their business objectives, their PI objectives, to change during the PI, perhaps more frequently than others. So I think it's this configuration, this adaptability, and I think by having events like this, it allows RTEs to share some of these different approaches they've taken. We want them to adapt the framework. I think there was a famous quote from Dean many years ago that he said, if I came to visit you, 4 or 5 years into your SAFe implementation and you were still doing SAFe by the book as we described it, then something's gone wrong. We want you to advance it beyond what we provide you with, and that's what I think the RTE is uniquely positioned for because of the place they sit within the SAFe enterprise.
And that is a really powerful message, right? If we visit companies 5 years after we have our first talks, for instance, and you are still doing exactly the same thing, using the same ways, same facilitation techniques, and that's also valid for the RTE, I also ask myself, how agile, just to come back to your previous point, your first question, how agile are we as an organization? When we start with SAFe and when we start a different way of working, when we start having a different mindset, it's all about the learning journey. It's all about learning as you go as well, using the empiricism on your favor, adapting the framework, adapting the practices as well to what you need, and then move forward and learn and improve for the next time. And the RTEs, they are so important in this role. And that's hence my question, in fact, how do we help them to become a system thinker as well? And the RTE needs to be able to help their teams, their arts, in seeing, okay, we need to test this. Very small steps, as you have just mentioned, for instance. Very small steps, experimentation. We experiment 1 PI, 2 PIs, and we change, and we adapt, and then we move. And that's how we go. We don't need to do, for instance, like you've just seen this morning, for instance, Joe speaking about Tesla, and we are going very, how can I say that? You put a lot of emphasis on the experimentation very hard, and then you go for that and super fast and so on, because every company has their own context, their own journey as well. But what from that can we learn and adapt to our own context? And RTE is a great role and a very important role to bring this kind of mindset to the company, is it not?
I completely agree. I mean, it's always a challenge, isn't it? Because when I was speaking this morning, I hope that I successfully shared with them some different tools and techniques and tactics. But it's also about making sure that we focus the time we have on where it can be most effective. And RTEs, like many other roles, but specifically the RTE, can end up being a very busy role. One thing we spoke about this morning, Eduardo, was the idea of optimized time and zone. How do we really optimize effective working patterns? And that applies to the RTE as well. And I think one challenge we see sometimes is that RTEs know that they have to take responsibility for helping to change the system, but they don't always apply their efforts either in the right place, or perhaps they haven't been allowed to apply them because of how their role has been described for them. And one thing I said this morning is that typically there's one main bottleneck, and we heard that in Joe's talk as well. There's probably something that you and I and most people know that in our company there's this one thing that if we don't address, everything else is really going to fall by the wayside. The challenge is that sometimes that big significant bottleneck has been there for many years. It's just how we do business. And often what we see is that organizations will fix things around the edge, things that are easier, low-hanging fruit, we might describe it as. And what I try to say to the RTEs today is stick with that big thing. Take a small bite of it, but realize that unless we address that big bottleneck, the promises of unlocking flow just won't be realized. So they've got to stick by their guns. They've got to really make sure they're working on the right problem, because there will be so many problems thrown at them. Some of those problems the teams can deal with. Other problems might be managed through the transformation team or the LACE. But there are specific things the RTE needs to help us with. They don't need to be the experts in how to solve it. These could be technical problems. They could be business-focused problems. They could be product problems. But the RTE needs to do the work to build a case around why we want to solve it and bring the right people together to solve it. So you're absolutely right. They've got to take the small bites, but make sure it's in the right place it's easy to get distracted by all the other things you could be doing.
And when you say that, it reminds me, in fact, that we, as human beings, it's really difficult for us to have these hard and tough discussions. And for the organization, it's the same, because the organization is just a living organism that is formed by people, in fact. And one of the reasons I wonder might be this, what you have just mentioned, for instance. We are taking the low-hanging fruit, but we are not discussing the actual problem. And okay, we've got something, it's done, but it's not the actual problem that is a blocking point for us, or that is avoiding us to have the flow that we need, for instance. So do you think that the RTE is someone that needs to hold this kind of very tough and hard discussions within the organization?
I think sometimes the reason these discussions are tough is that there are viewpoints and opinions that can't be resolved. And that's why this morning I put such a focus on metrics. Because what I want the RTE to be able to do is to be able to go into a group of these stakeholders and leaders, use the metrics available to them, and demonstrate, as we say in SAFE, that the facts are friendly. This is the facts of the system. And as you know, Eduardo, we talk about a system being the real thing that becomes the impediment to working effectively. It's not that the people aren't trying to do their best. It's not that the people are trying to do things in ways that building bad quality. It's not that people are trying to be slow. People are trying to do the best job they can, but a bad system beats good people every time.
Yep.
So through the flow metrics today, I hope the RTs will be able to build a good case. And one of the metrics we really went quite deep on today in the talk was this idea of cost of delay. We put huge emphasis in SAFE on cost of delay in terms of how we prioritize using weighted shortest job first. But we can also use cost of delay in trying to illuminate where in our workflows the biggest delays are and how much value we're losing because of those. And one thing I said to the RTs this morning, to support the discussions you're going to have, try and take some of those delays and ask yourself, if we didn't have those delays in the system, how sooner could we have delivered our products? What additional revenue would that have achieved? What penalties would we have avoided? How much would we have beaten the competition by? And just by simply starting to think about these delays in terms of the cost they're accruing, and I mean a real financial cost here, I think will unlock the ability for RTEs to gain the attention of those leaders who can truly change the system, and then supplemented with some simple flow metrics that we spoke about, should convince them beyond any reasonable doubt this is something we need to do in order of addressing whatever the improvement we want to put in place is.
I like very much what you just mentioned, Andy, because I also recognize that the RTE, and I'm going to say it again, it has a pivotal role in the success of what we call the business agility, in fact. Not just looking within their own area of influence, the Agile Release Train, for instance, the teams and so on, but everything that goes around and up and above. So the RTE has to have all the tools and the ways to also influence the other levels, to talk to people, to talk to lean portfolio managers, to talk to executives as well, to business owners and so on, and bring this kind of mindset. Okay, this is what is happening. I'm not going to judge here. These are the facts. So what are we going to do? That is something that we can get if we have the right metrics at the right place. Because otherwise it's too difficult. It's just, I feel that, I think that. So the RTE needs to have these tools in hand, and then we are going to be able to speak the language, as you've just mentioned, the language that other areas, other people in the organization, they understand. Is it about money? Is it about customer satisfaction? Is it about the learnings that we are having? So what is it that appeals to you? And then I'm going to talk to you in this language. And the metrics, they are going to help us on that. Again, I'm not going to judge. I'm just going to present. What can we do to make it better, for instance? Is it good enough? Should we change something?
Yeah, and what that reminds me of when you were saying that is I always say to people, SAFE is there to really lower the water level. SAFE is there to make transparent what was once hidden. Things like the system demo, really demonstrating our ability to integrate a working solution across many teams. Things like the inspect and adapt, surfacing those systemic problems. Things like PI planning, putting the planning and the decision-making around planning in the hands of those that are responsible for the work. And all those events and activities and roles are there to really lower that water level, as we say, so that the big boulders, those big impediments start showing. But SAFe won't remove those for you. That's where the organization then needs to step up in their particular context and say, right, now that we can see clearly that we have this problem, what do we need to do to address it? So I think it's another good reminder that it's one thing to launch an Agile Release Train, it's one thing to implement the SAFe ways of working, but the real business agility starts to be realized when the RTEs and others around them start addressing these big problems that maybe they weren't even aware of before, because SAFe has helped make them visible. And that's why transparency, a core value of ours, is so important.
Transparency enables trust.
Absolutely.
And the RTE needs to be trusted, like the people as part of the team as well, like anyone in the organization, right? That's what we all expect, to be trusted.
At its heart, SAFe is a people-based framework. We added as 6.0 another core value, respect for people. We've done a lot of work recently around principles 8 to 9, unlocking intrinsic motivation, decentralizing decision-making. So we put a lot of effort recently and in the years before to remind the organization that people do all the work. We've got to build a framework in which they can do their work effectively. And I shared this morning on the stage, and I've spoken to others about it as well, employee engagement. It has become such a critical transformation metric. I just spoke to an RTE just a moment ago, and I said to them, how do you measure whether the work you're doing is effective? And he said, I measure it by people telling me they're having fun at work. And that's really what it comes down to. All of this improvements around flow, all of this improvements around autonomy, decentralizing decision-making. We want to create an environment where people come to work inspired to build the products and services that will delight their customers. And the RTE plays a critical role in that.
It is absolutely great. And you guys are listening now to the Back to the Future theme, because this is the theme for the RTE Summit of this year. So this means that the other sessions are about to start. And so I'm not going to hold Andy for a longer time, but let me just ask you something, because I was talking to an Agile coach and also an RTE just a couple of hours ago, and he said something that I really enjoyed it. I liked it, and he said that the RTEs cannot be shy. And I said, can you explain it a little bit more? And he said, yes, RTEs, they need to dare to ask questions. So I'm gonna dare to ask you a question, Andy. No, just kidding. So as we are coming to the end, what would be the three tips and tricks that you can give to our audience, and specifically to the RTEs, that they can use to improve themselves, to become better, to help their team members, to help the others, and to help the organization to become better as well?
Well, I think that first one is a great place to start. I shared some questions today on one of my slides. It was a slide specifically about batch size, but it could apply to anything. And these were provocative questions, or at least testing questions that RTEs could really ask. How long has it been since we integrated the full solution? How long do we wait until we really test our new features? How long do we actually wait until we deploy the work we're doing? And the point I was making for the RTEs was, number one, they don't need to be experts in everything. And number two, they don't need to know what the answer is. So I think the first tip is, start being more inquisitive. Start asking more questions. Start perhaps asking questions in areas that you don't normally. I think the second one is, you can't manage what you can't see. And a lot of the work we do, Eduardo, is knowledge-based work, software development. It's typically invisible, in quotes. There's not a production line that we're able to observe or see when things get backed up. So the RTE has to work hard to make visible the workflows through value stream mapping, through developing ARC Kanban systems. Once they've done that, then they can start to have conversations about where they're seeing the problems. And then the third tip I would say is, we've got to close the loop. I've experienced myself, and I'm sure you have, times where organizations have made good efforts with good intentions, maybe in the right areas, but we never came back to say, did we actually deliver the benefits we expected? Was the effort we expended realized in terms of the value that we achieved? And I think sometimes the reasons that we get lethargy around these change improvements is because we don't stop to say to the teams, look at what you improved. Look at how much quicker we can do this. The measures that you shared here, the honesty that you had here, has helped us build a better system of work, and it's getting this value to the customers this much quicker. It's delivering these benefits in terms of the organizational outcomes. So the RTE has to help us close the loop. We've got to understand why it's important to do the things they're asking us to do. So those would be my 3 suggestions.
Those are really great suggestions, Andy. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you again for accepting to be the guest, very well-known guest in this podcast session. I hope you enjoy the RT Summit, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me, Eduardo. It's been a great day so far. I've learned so much, and really it is wonderful being able to speak to RTEs to help us think about how we evolve the framework in the future. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much to everyone that that is listening this podcast session with Andy, and see you next time. Thank you.